Welcome back to another video where this time around we're going to be talking about Fnatic and their weaknesses and what I would think of if I was, for example, Rogue's coach in this case, because they're going to be playing up against Rogue. Let's get into it. We're going to be talking about what Fnatic's weaknesses are, what changed for Fnatic, and what draft expectations I'll have for Fnatic when it comes to this series and how they should really look to win. All right, now I'm just going to start with their playstyle because now, initially, I also thought the same thing, that Fnatic is a bot-centric team. And I think that they are, but I don't think it's as overblown as people think. I just opened up the video and Razork's bot. What a surprise. Yes, they are a very hard bot-centric team, and you'll see in the Mad series and so forth that they actually dive bot a lot. But also, if Wunder's on things like Gwen and Renekton, I think Razork does play topside a little bit, and he does go through mid a lot to make sure Humanoid has mid push. If you think about this game, in essence, he does an early gank top, gets Wunder ahead, and then they have like a 3v3 topside jungle after he leans bot after his base, where they get an extra 3 kills or 2 kills. He does like to force around top lane a bit, and you can see the comps are pretty good, right? Razork's already calling Wunder after top wave crashes to come with him to invade the Gromp, right? After Wunder heals up, and Humanoid's already on the way. So I'll just start off by saying where does Fnatic mostly play? Bot lane. I would say maybe 60-70% of the time they play through bot, but there is a lot of play through mid and top as well. So I would not over tunnel vision on the fact that he's only going to go mid, because he uses top prio really well. Here's another example of how Razork uses top prio when Wunder has a good matchup or he's ahead. Boom, just bring him from top to mid, force a dive, get Humanoid ahead, or give him a free base, right? And then go into his top side, start forcing heralds, things like this. And then the bot lane of Fnatic is the ones actually giving up, and the bot lane of Fnatic are the ones being dove. And this is where Humanoid comes down to cover them because they got mid push. So small rant, but yes, Fnatic are a bot-centric team, but I would not be surprised if Wunder gets things like Renekton and Gwen that top lane will need cover. And this is the location that I think Rogue should be a little bit aware of on the case that depending on draft, you know, what Wunder is playing. I think if he's playing things like Ornn and stuff, there's probably a lot less action towards top side, but it's just something to be aware of. The next thing I want to go through is what turned the ship around. Now, Fnatic's regular season, they were one best of one from being knocked out. I think if Misfits beat them, they were out. I know they had a tiebreaker as well. It was this game here. If Misfits won, Fnatic was out, I think. So they've gone from one game from being almost knocked out of playoffs, a 50-minute game against Vitality, to now, in people's minds, in my mind included, a team that is contesting a title maybe. Because if they beat Rogue, they'll be in the finals, right? What changed from here to make them a team that can actually contest the finals? Well, I've written down a lot of reasons because I've been going through almost every Fnatic VOD for a few hours now. The first one is very obvious. Humanoid has died a lot less. I don't know what the stat is, but he has not been dying a lot to ganks in this playoffs. You think of Humanoid during the regular season, he was a really liability. I think a lot of people will say the same thing. I think a lot of people agree that Humanoid decided to die a lot less. And they've band-aided it a little bit by putting him on champs that have more mobility, barring the Victor. Right, Sylas, LeBlanc, Ahri, LeBlanc, Sylas, Ahri, things that have more mobility and actually have early skirmish, so that he can't really get ganked that much early. So he can avoid them. That helps a bit as well. I think he's just way more cerebral and aware as to where the enemy jungler is than he was before, because often you'd see Fnatic games where side lanes are fine. Humanoid would just get ganked mid like 3 or 4 times on this game, for example, on the Vex against XL. He gets ganked like 3 or 4 times and the game's basically over, right? I'll just show it to you here. This Humanoid Vex? Yeah, it is. You're right, he's 0-2 by 7 minutes into the game because he's just being spam ganked and he's not really aware of where the ganks are coming from. So Humanoid stepped up a little bit and he's a lot more aware of jungle. Next thing is, I think Fnatic found a break point in regular season from the G2 game and from the XL game. These two games, these two losses, are what pushed Fnatic to be the team that they are today. Now, there's a lot of reasons why. And the first reason I'll show you is drafts. I think they had a long draft discussion after these two games. Now, obviously, I can't be sure, but if you cast your mind back to the G2 versus Fnatic game, we'll look at the XL one quickly because we already have it up. XL, very fast-paced comp. Talia, Trundle, all over the map. Zyra, Rakan, keeping perma-push bot, moving towards mid. Humanoids behind. They couldn't even contest their own jungle. And slowly but surely, they bleed out on all 3 lanes because they don't have the proactivity or the engage or the early game to do anything about it. So XL just kind of ran them over in Drake fights. They were always first the objective. They had control over 2 lanes minimum throughout the entire game. And Fnatic could never really push and shadow. They didn't really have any way to do anything. They didn't have a pushing bot to look for early dives. They didn't have an early game jungle to make any proactive plays. Humanoid didn't have a mobility mid, so he died to a lot of ganks. And Wunder was just doing Wunder things. I think the one thing that hasn't changed much in a positive way is Wunder. Wunder's been almost like a rock for this team for so long. Then we'll go to the G2 game. Very similar story. I think they probably had a long meeting after this game as well. Because, again, you see a version of Fnatic going up against a version of G2 who drafts so much early skirmish and forces plays that you have to respond to or lose out on. And they're playing Azir, Ezreal Rakan, Wukong. This is the opposite of playoffs Fnatic right now. This is the opposite. They don't play Ezreal lanes and get pushed in. They don't play Azir that much anymore, even though I'm sure Humanoid can play it. He's playing more mobility-esque early skirmishes. And you don't see Razork on Wukong. I think his Wukong has just dropped off. He's playing Trundle Poppy every game because he can actually do more in the early game on those champs, whereas on Wukong he can't, right? This is a comp that scales and plays for teamfights, and that's kind of the opposite of what Fnatic have been doing arguably in most of their drafts, because they're playing for early bot dives and tempo through bot. So these were two breakpoints, I think, where they realized the team that they were playing up against, G2 and XL in this case, who were top contenders of the league, expected in playoffs, they're saying to themselves, wow, we have a style that's too slow. We need to up the fucking pace, and we need to kick it into gear, right? We need to start playing like these other EU teams. And that's what happened. I think the biggest shift was Upset started going away from scaling champs, you know? He was leaning towards, like, look at this regular season, Aphelios, Sivir, Ezreal, Zeri. And as much as the Zeri was what got them to playoffs in the first place, Ezreal again, there was never really a bot matchup where Razork could come down on a stacked wave, a push, and look for these dives. Because if you look at Upset in playoffs now, Lucian Nami every game, Kalista lanes, these are the kind of things that Fnatic finds early game success on. And if they don't play those things, and they play things like Zeri or Sivir, and I mean, Upset's fantastic at these champs, don't get me wrong. I think Upset's probably the best performing AD right now in playoffs, right? He's unbelievable gameplay. If they don't have those pressure for bot dives, then they can have proactive mibs that Razor can play around. He can actually do things with this champ where he can either force plays or be in time to respond to them while playing a low econ champ that doesn't need resources, right? So like Wukong, for example, if you cover bot for like a minute or two and shadow them in a lane brush and you fall behind, your champ's just so useless in early skirmishes from that point onwards if you're behind. Whereas Trundle and Poppy always have the utility to be useful. Speaking of Trundle and Poppy, Razork is playing only Trundle and Poppy. One Sejuani game. You look at this summer, Wukong, Viego, the Volibear in the early season when it was meta. His champion pool is very small. And it makes sense because it's Trundle Poppy meta. But we'll get back to this in a little bit. We'll leave that for now, and we'll come back to that in terms of when it comes to weaknesses for Fnatic. And the last two things that I'll say that changed for Fnatic are Hilly. Hilly on range supports at the start of the split, it looked like he didn't really want to play them. He didn't find much success on them, and he was still going to Nautilus and Tom every now and then, and he was still leaning towards things like his Pyke and Comfort. Eventually, he got into the groove of just sticking to range supports, and his Nami has gotten a lot better throughout the split. The Yuumi, I'm not sure if that's something that they want to play, because I don't actually know how many competitive games Hilly has on Yuumi. I'll just check really quick, because I feel like it's 0. So he had none in Season 11, none in Season 10, none in Season 9, none in Season 8. I don't know when Yuumi was released, so I think that was his first competitive Yuumi game of his career that they played against XL. So Yuumi is going to be a big question mark in this series. We'll get to that a little bit later. But yeah, Renata and Nami seem to be his comfort range supports. And the Lulu was obviously really good in clutching them to playoffs with the Flash W and things. So good news is Hilly's good on range supports. He's happy on them. So to summarize, Humanoid's dying a lot less. Razork's found a lot of comfort on early game junglers that can play for side lanes a lot easier, or help mid get push-outs, or bring sides to mid to look for dives. They've played more bot lane, quote-unquote, kingdom champs, or more proactive bot lane champs that can actually stack waves and dive, or contest mid waves a lot easier with kill pressure, right? You think of Lucian on mid wave can always force mid push because you have kill pressure with Nami. Hilly looks good with range supports, right? And this all changed because Fnatic played up against G2 and XL, I think, and learned that they were a little bit of a step behind in the meta. The last thing I'll show you is just Fnatic versus Mad Game 4, where Razork would be hovering bot to dive for upset Hilly. But the game is not that simple. You always want to play on 2 lanes. And what I mean by that is it's always good to bring your mid laner into the play. And this was something Fnatic was doing very rarely, I think, throughout the regular season. And they've started to do it a bit more in playoffs. Just an example, right? 3 minutes into the game, Razork ganks bot, gets the flash. They want to dive bot. What does Razork do? He goes back towards mid, hovers around mid so Humanoid can't get ganked. Pulls Humanoid with him to look for this bot dive. right? And whether or not the execution is there, doesn't matter. I think they pull it off, doesn't really matter. The main point is they're playing through mid to side, which is so important for 2 reasons. One, the obvious one, your mid laner can get involved in the play. It can be a 4v3, he can base and TP back to mid and he won't lose anything. But 2, it means Humanoid cannot get ganked. He's not vulnerable. If Razork just ran bot right here and Humanoid stayed mid and tried to just poke the TF on our tower, there's a very high chance he just gets ganked and killed. Or if he just sits back on his wave while his team's 3-manning bot, he has to give up the push anyway. So you may as well just bring him with you. And I think Razork and Humanoid have started to work a lot better together. They don't seem like they're playing different games anymore. Alright, that was it for what turned the ship around and why Fnatic is now looking like probably one of the strongest teams in Europe. And the last thing I want to say is Wunder has just always been a rock. Wunder has been like this reliable, I can play carry, I can play tank champ for you through playoffs. He has like a plethora of champs that he can play when it comes to counter picking and things like this. And he always seems to be doing his job really well. So massive props to Wunder. I think he's been stepping up a lot in playoffs. Cool. Before we move on, there's one small thing I want to touch on. And it will cast our minds back to spring playoffs. Now I'm going to say this and I'll bring it back up later. Fnatic versus G2 season spring playoffs. There was a series where Humanoid played LeBlanc 4 games out of 4, and G2 tried to find ways to counter LeBlanc. First game was Lissandra, second game was Karma, third game was Ahri, fourth game was Orianna. One of them worked out of 3. And then you go forwards to their next series that they played against each other when G2 destroyed them. They then banned LeBlanc every game, G2. Because they didn't want Humanoid to play it, because they thought that their answers weren't sufficient enough. Now we will fast forward to the future, and we will look at summer. Now I'll bring that back up in a second. So the reason I bring up that G2 and Fnatic series is because you had almost like G2 trying to solve a Rubik's Cube of Humanoid's LeBlanc, right? Now he hasn't played it that much in this LEC summer, but I keep going on about the fact that he's playing these mobility mids. So champions like Taliyah and Lissandra are 2 champions that come to my mind as really good answers in the current meta into things like Ahri, Sylas and LeBlanc, right? Lissandra into Ahri and LeBlanc, Taliyah into Sylas. These are champions that I'm thinking of when I think of Fnatic. I'm sure that they were banning Taliyah and such when they're picking Sylas. And when they're picking LeBlanc, they ban Taliyah as well or something. They ban Taliyah on 4 or 5. So I think if Larson can, and I'm not sure if he can, but if he can play Lissandra and he can play Taliyah, I think these could be 2 dangerous champs against Humanoid's champ pool that could look to shut him down. So that's something I'll be tracking in draft. And I consider a quote-unquote, not a weakness per se, but something that can be abused into Humanoid depending on what mid laner he picks. Because these 2 champs either shut them down in teamfights, Taliyah or Lissandra, or they can just straight up outroam them. You think of the Fnatic series against, was it XL that they lost? I think they were struggling against champs that either roam faster than Humanoid or can contest the push easier against Humanoid. So they played TF into Sylas, mid push into roam, with the Kled, and then they played Lissandra as well. I think these are 2 champs that can be pretty powerful against Fnatic, so they have to be careful when it comes to mid pool and mid blind. Often what they would do is they would pick mid lane on 3 on red side, like LeBlanc, and then ban 1 or 2 away. So I think that's the plan that they'll go for if they're blinding those champs. But I think Sylas is a dangerous one because Humanoid Sylas looks really good. Right, next thing that I consider a weakness that I think Rogue could target is Razork. Now, Razork has been having a phenomenal playoffs. He's smurfing out of his mind. He looks like a man unleashed. But if I'm Rogue, I would want to shut that down. And there's many ways you can do it. Because Trundle Poppy seems to be his comfort. Now, the question I have for Razork is, if I'm Rogue, is does Razork play Jarvan? And I think the answer is no. What I would do is go into his history. Season 11, no Jarvan games. Season 12, he's not played it once either. Season 10, did he play Jarvan? 3 times and lost. So I would take that as a very safe bet to go into a playoffs game and say, what happens if we ban Trundle on blue side and we're first pick and we're going to first pick Poppy? What's your response? You know, do you want to play Xin Zhao? I mean, he's played 1 Xin Zhao game, didn't look super comfortable. You want to go back to Viego Wukong and lose your early game pressure? Or do you want to go back to things like the Volibear, which aren't meta right now? That's the question I'd be asking myself right now. I think the easiest target for Rogue is Razork, who is actually the best player on Fnatic right now. And I think that's why you target him. Because look at his playoffs. It's Trundle Poppy only. And the thing is, you might ask, well, what happens if they just ban Poppy then? You know, you ban Trundle, they ban Poppy. I think Malrang is very fine first picking Jarvan. I think Malrang is very fine playing other early game junglers that I think maybe Razork's not as comfortable on. Vi is something that he can play as well. I'm not sure how Razork's Vi is. Xin Zhao, not the best, but definitely something that you could add to the quote-unquote pool of early game champs, and then Pantheon, for example, right? So my curiosity is, what happens if Rogue force jungle bans and you have to respond? What does Razork play? Does Fnatic go back to this farming jungle style of Viego or Wukong and then lose this early game pressure to forcing bot dives because you have a losing jungle matchup early? Does Razork want to go to... I think the two things that I think Razork would go to is Lee Sin and Volibear. I think these are the two comfort champs. I don't think he has Vi or Jarvan ready. And I think that these would be the two. Obviously, Xin Zhao we can use as an outlier. But this is what the jungle pool would look like. And I wonder how crazy they get with it. Now, I hope Fnatic's aware of this. I hope they're aware that these are the only two early game junglers that we're playing right now. And we can't rely on the fact that enemy teams will just give us Trundle or Poppy on the 1-2 anymore. We have to be very aware of what we're going to pick. They played 3 Wukong games in the regular season and lost all 3 of them. In playoffs, I think he played none. Yeah, he played absolutely none. 1 Sejuani game. Sejuani could also be a first pick by Rogue, right? You imagine they ban Trundle, you ban Poppy, you ban Jarvan, and then you're forced into a Sejuani ban, maybe? Because otherwise, they're first picking Sejuani, and you don't play Jarvan, so you have to ban Jarvan too. And if you don't, they'll first pick Jarvan, right? There's 3 jungle bans here that only one of them Razork can play. The Sejuani he can play as well, but that'll be instantly first pick to deny it. So it's a really weird, complicated situation where I think blue side for Rogue is going to be broken in terms of jungle bans, and red side can work as well, depending on how hard they want to commit. Because do you really want to commit on red side to Trundle, Poppy, Sejuani ban? Probably not, but it could work. It could definitely work. Now, the next question I have is the Kalista bait. Now, maybe I talked a little bit about this on the Rogue side, but as Rogue, I think I would be very happy in giving upset Lucian or Kalista for the first game. Why? Well, the Lucian one I think I described in the Rogue video, saying that I would play some kind of Senna lane into it, because Trimby and Comp have shown that they're very good Senna Seraphines early on to the split, but they haven't picked it again. But I wonder if you can do the similar thing versus Kalista. You know, what happens if they give over Kalista and Comp then goes towards an Ashe game? Or what kind of bot lane can they play with Ashe in my head? Because I feel like they could also play some double ranged bot lane with Ashe support that I think Trimby, has he shown it to us? I feel like Trimby's played Ashe support. Yeah, he has. The bot lane of Rogue, they have a very wide plethora of champs that they could try. You know, they've shown Sejuani support, Lux support, Ashe support, Taric support, right? Trimby's shown that he can play a lot of things. And some of these things can work, you know. Ashe into Kalista is great. Caitlyn Lux into Lucian Nami could really work. Sejuani support, I'm not sure where that would slot in. Probably good with things like the Kalista maybe. But there's a lot of bot lane champs that I would be a bit worried about for Rogue, because it's very standard to ban away things like Renata or Leona or Nautilus on 4-5. But I feel like something's going to happen in bot lane that could change this entire series. And I think Fnatic need to be very, very aware of it. Like the first game, they go Lucian Nami, they play against Senna Seraphine, or they play against some random bot lane where they match Soraka into Nami, which I think Misfits did. You know, these are the kind of things that I'll be looking at as Rogue giving answers to it, because Rogue can't afford in the draft to ban Lucian, ban Kalista, ban Sylas, ban Poppy, ban Trundle. There's too many things. They have to have answers prepared for something. And I think the easiest answers to have prepared are answers for Lucian Nami. Was it the Soraka they played into it? No, it was into a Sivir Renata, but I think Soraka can work pretty well as well. Trimby has some interesting pool that I feel like they could pull out into the Lucian Nami, maybe even a Blitzcrank lane. We'll have to see. But I have this sense, there's too many bot lanes to go through, that something will happen in bot lane in game 1 or 2 that could determine the series, and Fnatic need to be very aware of. Now, the last thing I will go to is gameplay. I've seen a couple of blunders from Fnatic, mostly through lane assignments. So I'll just show you a few examples of what I mean. So they win a great team fight, they get a dragon, but I feel like what Fnatic are doing a lot of the times when I see them making mistakes or getting collapsed on is they're over pushing one lane when they don't have the numbers advantage to do it. So here's a good example where Upset and Hilly get mid push and they're tunnel visioning onto getting this mid tier 2. Yes, Humanoid's collapsing from top side, but they just make themselves so vulnerable to TP flanks, to collapses from sides, even though you're first or matching, that XL can just collapse on them and get kills, right? And Wunder is a bit late to respond and feels isolated from these plays, because yes, he has TP, but he can't even TP mid because there's no ward, so he has TP on bot side, and then I'll just play the fight. Yeah, basically it is XL just win the fight, right? And Fnatic just get caught overextending when they have a 3k gold lead. But this is something that Fnatic surprisingly do a lot. I'll show you another example of them doing it again. It was in Mad Fnatic Game 4. They do a very similar thing where they have this big lead and they'll overcommit resources onto one lane to push, thinking that there's a free objective on the map, when in reality there isn't. So here they do it as 5, which is good. They get bot tier 3. Then they reset and try to keep the pace of the game going. And they put Humanoid, Upset, and Hilly and Razork 4-man top, but Wunder has no TP. This is a very similar situation, just on top. They think they have a pick, they culling onto him, they try to get the kill. Niski has stopwatch, luckily for him. But look at how split they are. Now all of a sudden Elyoya's over here. Wunder is catching midwave. The 3 on the top is trying to finish off Niski, which they finally get. But by the time they actually come back to this grouped up version of Fnatic, they're sitting at a 7-8k gold lead, losing and flashing away. Because they just... I feel like they probably thought it's 20 minutes into the game. Top tier 1 is a free objective. Let's just take top tier 1, push out, go back to mid and go to Drake. I think that'll be the very easy plan. Push top, crash the next wave into tier 2, move mid, take their vision, push in mid wave and go to Drake. But they get over tunneled on, oh, we can push, we can get a kill, we can try and get a tower, and then they all get collapsed on and die. So they need to be very careful about overstaying on lanes where they can get collapsed on really easily. And I think there's another example on here in this same game where they almost throw again at 23:38. I've got written down, where they overchase too much as well. I feel like they get lost in the chaos sometimes, you know. Here they're thirsty for it. They think, oh, we have some free kills, and they're gonna overchase again. And what happens again when they overchase, similar to when you overstack on one lane, you split up, right? And Fnatic seem to be splitting up quite often when it comes to games where they're really far ahead and they think they can force plays. Not 100% of the time, a lot of times they're very coordinated, but Humanoid's now got no front line in front of him. Wunder, again, is not part of the fight. Razork's too deep, and Upset and Hilly have no gap close. So if I'm Rogue and I'm looking at these games, I'm saying if they're overcommitting onto one lane with 4 members, we need to punish this. We need TP wards on lanes behind them when top tier 1s are down or mid tier 1s are down. TP wards on lanes are really important so we can collapse and try to get a flank on them. And yeah, just punish any overextension by Fnatic whatsoever, because it's very likely that they're probably quote-unquote inting. Obviously the game state really depends, and I would track Wunder's TP as much as possible, and obviously they will, but they need to have a timer on Wunder's TP the whole game. All right, draft expectations. What is Fnatic going to do in draft? Well, Fnatic haven't really shown us that much. They've done many different drafts. They've done drafts where they ban away Sylas themselves against players like VTO. They ban double range support. They've shown us games, I think it was against Mad, where they're banning Draven a lot of the time, and Kalista and Talia. It's hard to say what they will do against Rogue. But again, the first question I have is, does Rogue want to ban Trundle, Poppy, Sejuani and start contesting that pool to put Razork behind? I think Yamato and Razork need a plan for that, in case he needs to play out something like Jarvan or Xin Zhao. The second thing is, I think Lucian Nami will be given through to Fnatic probably in game 1, or a Kalista lane will be given through to game 1. I highly doubt that Rogue should. I just think it's bad for Rogue to ban Lucian Kalista on blue side 1-2 if they are blue side, or even on red side ban Lucian Kalista, because what's the point in banning Lucian Kalista on red side and they first pick Draven? It's what's your answer now, you know? Ziggs, maybe they play a Ziggs game, a Jhin game. No, don't do that. So yeah, I feel like if they ban Lucian Kalista, they're not trading ADs, and you're basically forced to ban 3 ADs on red side, which is not great. You really don't want to do that. Azir is another contested pick, which I think I talked about in Rogue series, because I think Humanoid will want to play it, and Mad was banning it a lot against Humanoid as well. So I think the picks for this series, as much as like meta champs overlap a lot of the time, Humanoid, Azir, and Sylas. Larson, probably Talia is something that he might lean towards. Does he play Lissandra? Is he going to play Lissandra? If he does, this could change the series. And then for bot lane, it'll be power pick contest. And yeah, I think if I'm Fnatic, I'm prepared for jungle bans. I'm probably targeting mostly towards bot lane on red side. I think banning Kalista on red is good, and banning Lucian on red. Was it Fnatic against XL when Fnatic was banning? Sorry, I just went on like an epiphany. Did they banned 380 carries, right? They banned 380 carries. They banned Draven, Kalista, Nila, Draven, Kalista, Nila, Draven, Kalista, Jarvan. What was it in game 4 and 5? Draven, Kalista, Sivir, Draven, Kalista, Wukong. Wow. I think Fnatic might do something similar on red side against Rogue. How's Comps Draven? Does he play Draven this bit? No, he hasn't. I feel like he has got Draven in his back pocket, though. Bot lane will be contested. Maybe if they don't ban Draven, they're going to ban something like Senna when they're on red side here Fnatic. Kalista, Senna, Talia could be something that they look into. But I think Lucian Nami will be the highest contest for sure. Cool, so that was the Fnatic weakness rundown. I'm really excited for Rogue versus Fnatic. I think I've gone through both teams a little bit now just to give you guys a little bit of insight. That was only 30-40 minutes of me going through a Rogue and a couple hours of watching Fnatic VODs. I'm sure the coaching staffs from both sides have probably been doing days, if not an entire week long, of figuring out what their plan is. And it comes down to shutting down what the enemy team want to do, stopping their comfort, and pulling out things that they might not expect, that you've trained and are practiced on and well versed on. So yeah, I think we could get a lot of surprises, mostly from Rogue in bot lane, and yeah, maybe from Fnatic in jungle in terms of picks. So yeah, I'm excited. I hope you enjoyed the video and enjoy the series.